Let's get started. So my name is Brad Woodberg. I'm a product manager with emerging threats at Proofpoint, and today we're going to be talking about command and control channels. So just a quick rundown of what we're going to be covering. A few minutes on the intro, but we're going to go heavy into some malware techniques. We're going to talk about actual malware, case studies, what we're kind of seeing, predictions and trends for the malware. I think it was actually. Sorry, we were having an issue on that. I think I have like one older version of the Rev on here, but we're just going to plow through it. We're going to talk about defense, and then we'll again wrap this up all in 45 minutes so that we can go get some beer and have some fun tonight. So why command and control, right? Why is this topic so interesting? Because so much of the so much of the information that we talk about, that we see in the security industry, blogs, articles, etc., focus on vulnerabilities, exploits, and the actual malware. And these are all great topics, all very interesting. But one of the big challenges for anyone who's operated in IDS, actually dealing with this on the front lines, is we know that trying to detect, vulnerabilities, the whole CVE game, different types of exploits, it's very noisy. It's not very high fidelity. You oftentimes will, have, alerts that trigger when actually, an asset wasn't actually breached. But actually, when you look at command and control, that's actually the point where you can say, hey, with high confidence, I know that this asset has been compromised. When you see that control channel is reaching out, it's kind of, as Rasheed Wallace of my Detroit Pistons once say, the ball don't lie. And when you see that command and control channel, you know that something's going on. But probably the other thing that's really interesting about command and control is that this is actually the point where you go, from being on pure defense, you're getting hounded all day long, attacked from every which way, to actually the tables are being turned on the attacker. So, where you had to get it right every single time and they only had to get it right once, now it's the other way around. In order for them to maintain that connection, to maintain that control over that asset, they have to be right all the time. And so that's why I think, this is interesting and why we should talk about it today. So, just a minute or two, just when we look at just how this whole thing gets started, right? The way I see it, there's really two primary ways that assets are being compromised. You have executable content. This is your traditional malware, scripts, macro embedded in Word documents and other Office file formats, etc. There's actually not an exploit happening here. It's just oftentimes now it's just social engineering, get someone to open a doc, and then there's a malware that now runs the machine. The other way is the exploit-driven approach, which is obviously ever so popular with the exploit kits, and this is where you're actually taking advantage of a vulnerability to be able to gain execution control on an endpoint. But really, it doesn't matter how it happened. The fact is, all that matters is that it's been compromised. So, to say a word or two, like why does malware even need command and control channels? Like, what's happening here? Oftentimes when an asset is breached, it's not under the best of scenarios. It may happen on an asset that really isn't the ultimate target, ultimate goal. It doesn't have the information that an attacker is looking for. There might not be sufficient privileges. It might, especially when you're dealing with exploits, you have a very small buffer or window in which to fit the actual payload in, so you have to deliver it in pieces. Really, oftentimes a lot of malware just doesn't have a full, especially if you're dealing with like crimeware, not so much target attacks. It's basically shipped bare bones, and it needs to get more information before it can pull off whatever it's trying to do. So that's where command and control comes in. Just a word or two. Basically the command and control channel is going to be used for a lot of different things, for pushing the actual configuration, for escalating the breach, as I mentioned, and this is where it's going to be reaching out to command and control infrastructure. Another aspect of command and control is actually exfiltration. So getting the information, the intellectual property that's on an endpoint, on an asset, out into the attacker's hands. So if we look at something like Locky, maybe going through and cataloging all the files on the endpoint, figure out what's interesting and encrypting them. If we look at something like Zbot, this one is actually using a DNS channel for command and control. So they didn't even have to use anything special or customized. They're actually, or even direct for that matter, with DNS, you can just send a query and it's going to find its way home and essentially all the way to the server and back. So, in this case, it's actually exchanging commands and information for the malware to take advantage of. So let's just take a quick look at an ever popular vector. So the Angler exploit kit, may it rest in peace. This is I chose this because it's just so prolific. In the last few years, even I saw like a bakery down the street from my house had their website had actually been popped and was serving up an Angler redirector, and that's really the interesting thing. Is that it's not that the signs are always so obvious, leading up to an infection. It's not like it was, defaced or something like that. It was just, there was a little iframe shoved in there, and if you weren't running, some security software, you would never know. But anyhow, we digress. So looking at the Angler exploit kit, first, typically you're going to hit some sort of a redirector, right? In this case, as I mentioned, our poor bakery, and that is going to redirect you to a traffic distribution system. So this is basically going to evaluate your endpoint. It's going to say, hey, they're running Microsoft Windows 7 and Flash, this version. Okay, we're going to custom tailor an exploit to that actual an exploit to that endpoint. And then finally, an exploit and payload will be delivered, oftentimes by different infrastructure. Now, here's the really interesting thing about this. Up until this point, you really don't have confidence that an asset has actually been compromised. And all the while, you're probably chasing down 1 million alerts from your IDS and all sorts of other endpoint systems because, saying, hey, we saw this Angler redirector and blah, 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 and there's this exploit, and, checked what version of Flash. But there's really no indication, no high fidelity indication that this has actually been fully compromised until you see that command and control. And once you see that, then you know for sure that, that the system has been overtaken. Now, just a quick word, for, a lot of times people get lateral infections confused with actual command and control. And so basically with lateral infections, typically what you're talking about is how malware is going to spread within an organization. One thing that I think is a big differentiator is that typically lateral infections will leverage native enterprise protocols to spread. Not exclusively, but that's a lot of what we see. Whereas command and control may be anything from a traditional channel to, so basically maybe like a HTTP, HTTPS, and maybe a custom protocol. We'll talk about some of the different trends and things in just a little bit. But effectively, the internal lateral stuff, like if we take Lockheed for as a perfect example, and all the hospitals that made a lot of news, when they got breached and all their, files were encrypted and the whole place shut down, and they had to pay $17,000 ransom, which is really quite a steal in my opinion for full operations of a hospital. But yeah, glad it wasn't more. In that case, basically it was just an endpoint that got compromised. It wasn't like the file server got breached and then it actually broken the actually encrypted the files. It was an endpoint that had access to the file server using SMB. It encrypted the files. So you actually do see a lot of that. Just leveraging the native protocols that are within the network itself, whereas command and control is a far more rich and exotic and interesting set of protocols that are used. Now, I'd like to kind of just before we get into the meat, just talking about how kind of the cat and mouse game has evolved, because like many things, the attackers kind of operate on on an economical scale, right? They don't want to, especially when you're talking about crimeware, but they don't want to do, take more effort than they need to, spend more money, more time to make their infrastructure more robust. So they're going to kind of, play along with the vendors and what is, actually, being effective to the point where it's not. Then they kind of up the game, a lot of the very early malware was just, leveraging very simple, high level or high range like TCP UDP ports that could really easily be filtered out on a router or on a firewall, easy as that. kind of evolved into leveraging other applications like IRC for command and control. And then, of course, as some organizations started to tamp down more and more and restrict firewall access and outbound proxy access, a lot of them, and really the funny thing is that there was at the exact same time, I feel like a lot of the peer-to-peer applications, the file sharing apps, BitTorrent and so forth, they kind of converged along with the malware because they realized that, hey, these ports are almost always open, so so we can leverage them. Malware also shifted over port 80, port 443. Then you had the NGFWs come out that could identify, hey, this isn't HTTP, this is some binary protocol that we've never seen, so we can block it. And all that isn't very interesting, but what's starting to get more interesting is how a lot of the malware is leveraging different types of cloud apps, and it's actually doing steganography and encoding messages in in files and in various other metadata that we'll see. We'll go through some examples in a bit, and this is kind of where where I think a lot of the future is, but essentially the malware has gotten to a point where it's really getting sophisticated in command and control channels. Now, at the same time, it's important to look at how command and control systems are being hosted. This isn't like categorically, a precise, kind of drop off at any point in time for when things change over, but we actually do see, progression, especially with some of the more sophisticated actors in malware. At the very beginning, everything was kind of statically hosted. You had IPs that were hard-coded into malware, and the malware wasn't really changing. So today we still see IPs that are hard-coded into malware, but it wasn't really, you would have these C2 hosts that are up for years, and it would take a long time for that to kind of filter into various lists and so on and so forth. I think that those days are things have evolved quite a bit. Shifted to leveraging DNS, but again, you still had a single point of failure, a name, and even though the IP could change and you could route the traffic elsewhere, you still had to cope with the fact that if that DNS name was discovered and blacklisted, wasn't changed, and again, we're talking over a long period of time, not like what we have today, which can be hours or days. Basically, the DNS, the malware could be shut down. Config updates, malware would actually go out and update itself. Again, not particularly sophisticated, but where things started to really get interesting in my mind is around the time of the Game Over botnet with the Zeus malware, because it certainly wasn't the very first, but we saw organizations really had a very hard time for several years. I mean, for almost 8 years or something, trying to control this malware because it leveraged more advanced techniques, domain generation algorithms, peer-to-peer, C2 infrastructure. So you really got rid of that, that centralized model in the same way that, like BitTorrent and, Skype and other types of peer-to-peer based networking protocols and applications would work. And perhaps the most interesting is that now so many of the, or not so many, but we're seeing more and more of the malware starting to leverage cloud services as C2. So basically, you don't even have to operate anything yourself. We'll get into the list a little bit, but you can use Twitter, you can use Amazon, you can use the comment section, kind of the classic, Cold War spy drop where you bring the briefcase in the park and you drop it and leave, and someone else comes and picks it up. It's kind of the same approach, and the beauty of it is it requires almost no investment, and we'll save more for that in just a bit. So one of the things that I found most interesting is steganography and what's kind of happening. Some of the potential we've seen, hints of this certainly in a bunch of different malware, and I think it's probably one of the most powerful ways to be able to exchange information in a covert channel. Basically, this is hiding information in plain sight. It's been used, it's not anything new. It's been used for centuries. If you guys have ever seen the video of, I think it was a Army or Naval Captain, Jeremiah Denton, who was captured in Vietnam, and he actually blinked in Morse code. They were doing one of those kind of captive videos where they interview and ask all those questions, and he actually blinked in Morse code torture. And of course, they put out the video. Everyone, I'm sure that they probably knew that that type of thing was going on anyways, but it was, very, very powerful because here, obviously the Vietnamese army didn't know, and it kind of made it through. So I think a lot of the kind of similar techniques can be used in actual malware for covert channels. And when you look at it, there's actually just a wealth of potential opportunities and places that you can hide this data. Everything from protocol headers, if you're talking about the network layer, metadata and files. You have all different types of encodings, audio, video, etc. We'll go into some of this, and it just really makes for an excellent place to hide your data and to have plausible deniability. And of course, you can layer other other techniques on top of it. So you can leverage encryption plus STEG to kind of hide things, in plain sight, if you will. So let's take a look at a few examples. So this is actually an APT malware sample that we saw, and I obviously anonymized the IP addresses. But basically, what was happening here was that the intro machine that was compromised, we think it was kind of like a Chinese APT. It was sending TCP packets, and there was no flags, which is obviously an interesting problem. Zero window, and it was never establishing sessions. So it was actually communicating to a C2, just by sending these packets, just by leveraging the fields in the headers. And this can really be done with a number of different protocols. It's not anything that's restricted to TCP. Another example is, when it comes to images, we're seeing, malware like VAWTrack and others that they'll actually embed configuration in an image. So in this case, what I did was I used a tool called OpenPuff, and I took the DEF CON logo, DEF CON 24 logo. In one logo, is just the original, and the other is there's an encoded message. And as you can see, there's you can't see, right? There's nothing that our eyes can distinguish. What's actually happening here is it's actually using the least significant bit, and it's encoding the message or the file. You can do anything in that least significant bit. So, the color palette is tweaked by, just one tiny value in each pixel, and that's enough that, another party could come across it, grab it, extract the message out if they know what to look for. But to not only the human eye, but even other computers, it would be very hard to be able to detect this type of technique. So let's talk about another set, besides just trying to hide, what are attackers trying to do to ensure that their command and control channels are not compromised. And so there's a number of different counteroffensive techniques that they're taking. One technique is to actually filter who can connect back. And this is used in other cases too. I mean, it may be used in the case of not just for C2, but it can be used in the case of actual malware infections, right? Especially targeted phishing. They want to make sure that vendors and also non-target assets, when they're dealing with targeted attacks, aren't going to be, potentially compromised, because of course they don't want vendors learning the secrets and so on and so forth. With crimeware, there might be a little bit less, they might care less and cast a wider net over what they're trying to compromise, so you might not see that quite as much, but we do actually see a lot of filtering from IP address spaces, not only countries, but even down to individual organizations if they're targeting an actual organization. Another thing is that can be leveraged is actual, kind of stagger, hidden messages in handshakes. Poison ivy is a really interesting, long-standing piece of malware that does that. It actually kind of encodes a handshake in the initial connection, and so even on that essentially first data packet, it'll know, hey, this is a legit, system or not. So we can, just filter that out without, if there's, just some other type of asset trying to reach out, it can filter it. And of course, encryption. especially leveraging preloaded SSL certs. It's interesting. We'll talk about Let's Encrypt because it has some implications here, but essentially, you can, if you just preload a trusted SSL relationship, the kind of public key or symmetric key into the actual malware, it can make a connection out immediately, so they can basically ensure that only malware or at least until that certificate has been compromised, only malware that is the actual target malware can reach out, and so other types of SSL snooping tools that are trying to grab information wouldn't be able to have success there. And just anecdotally, just in terms of what some of the things that we're seeing is that there's actually been a pretty strong push to a lot of anti-sandboxing techniques by the attackers. I won't get into a lot of the specifics, but you can, we're seeing that it's getting harder and harder. If any of you guys like, there's open source tools like Cuckoo and other rigs. The attackers are definitely trying to get wise to prevent sandboxing analysis of their, in a major way, right? This is not a new thing, but we're seeing just really the stakes are ramping up on malware that's trying to, kind of fly it below the radar. So it's not just from a C2 perspective. There's a lot of things all the way from the exploit to the, to the command and control where this type of thing is happening. Just a word, there's obviously different types of kind of families, right? Crimeware. This is just going to be casting a huge wide net. Typically, these are pretty chatty, but they will, we will see, that they'll go to a little bit greater lengths in a lot of cases to avoid detection. A lot of the target attacks, you'd be surprised, a lot of them are still just leveraging off-the-shelf remote access tools, right? And other commercial tools. They are targeted in that they are, the actual actor is targeting a particular party or particular organization, but they're not terribly sophisticated, all the way up to the targeted espionage, where just the sky's the limit, right? In some cases they may lack C2 altogether, but if you think about the Stuxnets and the Flames and the Dooku's and others, there can be some pretty sophisticated command and control that can happen, and even insider threats to basically make those work. So now we kind of covered, we talked a little bit about some evolution, things that we've seen historically over time. We talked about some of the different components of malware. Let's actually dive into a bunch of different case studies and look at how different pieces of malware are communicating with command and control. So GhostRat is probably one of the most simple examples, and again, this is out there. There still is a lot of GhostRat that we see infections because it's just such a prevalent tool that anyone can use, and this is just essentially, at least the commodity versions. Obviously, anyone can modify any of these things, but it's actually going to have a string in the actual payload. So it's really easy for, say, like an IDS to be able to identify it because it's just it's there. It's not really so obfuscated. It's kind of like if you look at like the evolution of BitTorrent. It started on just running on random ports, and then they switched to port 80, but then they not exclusively, but they would say BitTorrent in the actual protocol, and then they got to the point where they were using very advanced forgetting the name, Catamlia, distributed hash table functions to ensure that there wasn't such an easy way to match specific bits because everything was being dynamically generated on the fly. So Poison Ivy we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, where basically this is leveraging a handshake. So it's trying to basically identify who's connecting to me, a target asset. Is it actually, could it potentially be a researcher? They typically will embed, there'll be the malware will be delivered. It'll have a password in it, and that is used in the challenge authentication, so that even if you have different strains of Poison Ivy, an individual actor can differentiate and make sure that only the correct target is talking to them. And again, that can be important because if you just allow anything wide open, it means that the viability of this malware, of this actual compromise, is going to be not as long-lived because it'll be too easy to identify, too easy to take down. NanoLocker, this one, was, came out last year, is really interesting JavaScript, ransomware. Ransomware has just been absolutely blowing up. But one of the things that I found really interesting is, again, not necessarily leveraging, like HTTP or a TCP-based protocol, but actually leveraging the network itself and some of your traditional tools within a network. In this case, it was actually, encoding the Bitcoin address in ICMP. So basically, just send a packet, get a packet back, and know exactly what to do for the for basically holding the extorting the victim. Again, the network protocol layers, especially a lot of the legacy protocols, have a lot of great hiding spots. I mean, if you look at the difference between like IPv4 and IPv6, now granted IPv6 has all the next headers, and there could be some interesting things that you could do there, but there's a lot of a space where at the time, in the days of yore, they didn't know precisely that this whole internet thing was going to blow up, so they put lots of padding and other potential areas where you could hide things in, as prevalent as these protocols still are today, it makes a really great a channel for attackers. So Game Over Zeus, we talked about this a little bit earlier, where basically they want to avoid having the kind of fixed string centralized model, and and to make it hard for IDSs to identify. So actually what they do is a combination of techniques, but basically they will XOR information in the packet payloads, so it's always changing, and it's very difficult to leverage signature-based technologies with traditional IDSs to be able to identify this malware, because basically it is always changing. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't other ways to do it, but your traditional tools of the trade, if you will, need not apply. Now, Dridex, the banking Trojan, obviously has, just kind of, it took for quite a long time just the whole enterprise sector by storm. And who would have thought that, in 2015 through 2016, that macro-based malware would be, so pervasive and successful. But the fact of the matter is that it is and it was, even to this day, there still is, a great deal of malware that's leveraging these, age-old techniques from, the days of, Windows 95 or whatever. Particularly interesting is, one shift that we've kind of seen is, it's getting harder and harder to attack the machine, right? Because of different types of security protections that are built in, and so attackers are kind of saying, forget about that. We're just going to attack the human. And so I think like Dridex is a great example of that, where someone will get a document delivered. It'll one really cool example that I loved was the document would actually be blurred, and so it'd be an invoice doc. It'd be blurred, but there'd be a message that says click enable content so that the message will be visible. This payload may be corrupted. If you click enable content, it'll be visible, and that's exactly what it did. Unbeknownst to the user, it also reached out, grabbed a payload, and popped the machine. And any virus, traditional AV, couldn't keep up with that, because they would send a new hash of those documents. They would send millions and millions, hundreds of millions even on some days. And so tremendously successful even to this day. And obviously there's a lot of different flavors, if you will, of the different malwares, because they may be done by different actors. But in this case, in this one, they're actually again leveraging the kind of the blind, the dead drop, just like I kind of talked about with like Twitter, Amazon, using Microsoft comments to be able to essentially deliver command and control information that can be exchanged between this endpoint and the actual server in a covert fashion. Now Tor, obviously Tor is near and dear. It has, some very important real-world applications, especially in certain countries and regimes and for journalists. So certainly not trying to knock on Tor, but for the same reasons why it's great for the the aforementioned use cases, it's actually becoming quite a problem for a lot of the research community, because it doesn't even really require any type of client. You can literally use like Tor to Web and do this whole thing clientless. So whether it's Valtrak or Delexis, or there's a whole number, and we'll look at some trends that I've seen in a minute. Tor really is a great way to essentially bridge that gap between the endpoint and the command and control channel. Just kind of, you don't have to worry about anything once you establish that tunnel. Oh yeah, so basically, a quick animation here. So just showing here, we got the initial compromise where the payload is delivered as exchange. The endpoint is probing for Tor information, Tor nodes, doing DNS resolution, and then finally it's making its connection to Tor to Web, and so it can exchange this information covertly. Now, Air Viper, this was one we did some research on at Proofpoint. This is obviously a targeted APT attack, against the parties in the Middle East, we'll say, Israeli, and basically, it was just leveraging simple HTTP. So even though that this is kind of a sophisticated target attack, you can see that sometimes it's easier to blend in and remain kind of obscured, if you will, than to go completely out of your way to be able to essentially evade detection. So now, we talked about a few different types of malware. Let's look at some trends. So one of the first ones that's really interesting is SSL. Again, just like Tor, SSL is is a critical, fundamental component of our lives, and justly so. We basically went in the last couple of years from about 30% of the internet traffic to just right around 70% today, leveraging SSL. And so, what does that mean when it comes to to encryption, or sorry, to command and control? In and of itself, it didn't mean that much. But one thing that was a huge game changer is Let's Encrypt. Again, excellent project, and basically allowing anyone to get SSL certificates without having the security poverty line. The browsers would trust it, so on and so forth. So you could secure your applications, but now the attackers are leveraging that too, right? Because they say, hey, I can now, in an automated fashion, get legit SSL certs that the client is going to trust for free, and I can just burn them, and just like a domain name, just kind of rifle through them. So while I don't think that this will have much of an impact on like the state-sponsored malware, I think that especially for crimeware, it's like, why wouldn't you throw it in an encrypted tunnel and just make it that much harder for organizations to find this information? Now, IPv6 is really interesting because we don't see quite as much of it as one would expect, and even in the case of malware today, it's not as prevalent as we probably would have predicted 5 years ago. Even with all the basically IPv4 net blocks being exhausted, but it actually represents a pretty big challenge for us in the security community. You can get your own /48 from Hurricane Electric, which is 65,000 net blocks with each, I don't even know what that number is, trillion, whatever, of hosts for yourself, right? And so some of the traditional things that we could do, where we could say, hey, we can blacklist individual IPs, or even kind of pseudo net blocks. Like, how do you do that when anyone can get access to such a massive number of IP addresses? I definitely think that sooner or later, IPv6 is going to start to make a big splash. It's just once we hit that tipping point of availability to endpoints, and we're definitely, I think we're starting to get there very soon. And the other interesting thing about IPv6 is a lot of security technology actually still doesn't support it, surprisingly enough, or it does, but you're running an ancient version of whatever firmware from a vendor, and it doesn't support it. Or, one of the interesting things is, with IPv6, there's all the different tunneling capabilities. So, even today you can do IPv6 over IPv4 tunneling in a number of different protocols. IP protocol 41 is a good example of that, but you can do it over GRE and so on and so forth. And because you can take that approach, if security technology can't strip off those layers, can't recognize it, then it's just, it's a perfect path, right? Because it can just send it right on through. Where it may detect it in an unencapsulated format, it'll totally be blind to it, totally miss it when it comes to just, slapping a header on it. Tor, as I mentioned, so this is from some of the internal data I have access to, but we've definitely seen an increase of the malware samples of Tor over time. It's a little bit lumpy in some cases, but it certainly isn't going down, and I think it's just kind of a matter of time, on the threat landscape, if people don't start blocking other mechanisms, but they don't really do anything to address Tor, then more and more authors will just go with that. Now, leveraging actual cloud apps for command and control. Again, this is so attractive. And here's the thing. I talked about some of the names that you would know, right? The Twitters, the Amazon, the Microsoft. How they're using like TechNet or something to encode messages. But really, I'm actually a lot less worried about the name brand cloud apps than I am, other types of systems. Just like how my bakery got, popped with Angler. There's so many, mom and pop shops or other organizations, other applications that are out there that won't have, such a sophisticated team with, incredible research staff that'll be able to, basically identify that, hey, something is going on here, because now there's all these thousands of hosts that are connecting, and, there's some shenanigans afoot, right? They might notice eventually when everything totally crashes, but it might take a long time before they get to that point. And again, it's such an attractive target, because again, you don't have to host anything. You give up a little bit of control, but if you can do it right, it's it's kind of prime for the picking. And along those lines, there's so many different ways that you could leverage a cloud app to be able to hide that information. Whether it's an application like Dropbox where you can upload files, whether it's a Snapchat or something, who knows, Snapchat, but Instagram, where you can upload an image and have the information literally encoded in that image and have people grabbing it, and all of a sudden you're trending on Instagram or whatever, but it's really because all this malware is phoning home, and it's grabbing, it's getting this information. It really creates an infinite set of possibilities. So I expect in future years, and really all the stag we could dedicate a whole talk to. Maybe that'll be something I'll cover in a future talk. But it's really in my view, as soon as the kind of cat and mouse game catches up, the arms race, and attackers say, okay, some of these traditional methods aren't working, I think that you'll definitely see more and more that would take advantage of such a prime target. Another thing is layered evasion. So, we see this with, I would say more like the APT style actors, because, they can kind of, rather than being crimeware and massively, triggering a lot of activity, if you're just sending, doing some IP fragmentation with TCP segments, evasions on top of that, maybe, throw an SSL above that, HTTP, there's obviously a lot that you can do within the HTTP protocol to be able to hide information. And of course, as I've gone in some length, there's a lot that you can do in the actual embedded content itself. Starting to leverage these techniques in concert, right? Because really it's a way that you can catch some security vendors off guard that don't basically, even in 2016, might be blind to either the individual mechanisms or some combination of the mechanisms. It's definitely a real concern, and again, then you can keep on looping all these evasions, then you tunnel all the traffic. It's kind of up to the mind's eye in terms of imagination for how sophisticated the evasions could get. And as I've been saying a whole bunch, steganography is just a the possibilities there are so limitless. So I would definitely expect to see more and more actors. And I guess the really scary thing about steg is that when done right, it's so incredibly difficult to identify. As we saw earlier with the mirrored images, right? So it's almost what concerns me is more the unknown aspect of attackers that could leverage this type of technique, because unlike some of the traditional mechanisms that we can use to identify individual patterns, identifying steganography is incredibly difficult in a lot of cases, both for a human and even for a machine. So, how do you do that when, you have the amount of bandwidth that we're sending, ever increasing, it's getting more and more expensive to cope with that. How do you even identify when this type of technique is being used? It's a very good problem. So we kind of talked a little bit about the different trends and predictions. Let's talk about defense, right? What are some of the things that you can do, take away from this talk to basically defend your network, your assets, your infrastructure? And we'll start with the really obvious, but shockingly, it still is not even in this 2016 isn't that highly used. So basically, I took a ton of malware samples, millions of malware samples that we had, and looked specifically at the command and control ports and what ports they were using. And about 17% of the malware was using high-range TCP ports for command and control. So I'm not even talking about other aspects of the malware. I'm talking specifically for the command and control. And they do that because, of course, most people leave those wide open, and that's kind of a bad idea. I totally get why, and can be an administrative nightmare. But you can eliminate a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to command and control. And basically, if you can, with a lot of these pieces of malware, you might be able to totally break it if it can't phone home, right? If it can't get that extra payload, if it can't, share that encryption key or whatever, you can prevent this attack from being successful with, the click of the mouse. Another big thing is making sure that you don't have, applications that you wouldn't expect or wouldn't desire on your network running on your network. So, if you're an enterprise and there's no real reason for you to be running Tor, you probably shouldn't allow Tor out because, the malware will definitely take advantage of that. Even unknown binary, I should say streams, but basically, some malware on occasion will just run, some sort of odd encrypted protocol. If you can do deep packet inspection and do basically encryption entropy, which is something that a lot of modern IDSs do and NGFWs, you can identify potentially unknown types of malware just because it's again it's not matching a traditional protocol. It's actually not leveraging steganography. It's kind of standing out like a sore thumb. The next thing is the fingerprint no malware, this definitely gonna give a shout out and plug to to ET Open, which is free to anyone. Maintain we curate it, but it's free to anyone in the community. And that's something that we focus heavily on because, rather than having, just trying to only fingerprint all the CVEs and, play the whole CVE game with, 15-year-old German help desk software or whatever, focusing on, hey, we see this malware in the wild right now, and we're going to specifically identify it. And so if you see this trigger, you really know that this is bad. Again, a lot of people talk about the security poverty line, and that's true to some extent, but there are a lot of great open source tools. You don't have to break an arm and a leg to get your hands on, and this is a great example because by fingerprinting the no malware, you can introduce kind of a very good signal to noise ratio and basically identify the known bad. Now SSL is, again, it's kind of a mixed blessing, right? Because there's just a lot of blind spots nowadays, especially if you're off of an SSL tap. And so there's a few different things that you can do when it comes to SSL. There's a lot of new systems that are supporting SSL man in the middle. Again, there's controversy there. You can't always use it, for good reason. But if your situation dictates, and you can break it open for some traffic, for instance, let's say any SSL site that that isn't categorized by, say, like a web filter or something like that, you could break it open and inspect it. You'd be able to identify, potential, command control infections, so on and so forth within that SSL stream. But the good news is actually you don't have to do that in all cases. And again, the ETOpen, abuse.ch is another great source. Have not only signatures but publish blacklists, certificate blacklists. So just by you can actually just view what is a known bad certificate. You never have to crack open the stream. You can just fingerprint it and say, okay, this machine is popped because it's reaching back, using a, let's say Dridex, known bad SSL, so going to a known bad site. So it doesn't require you to actually crack open the stream to figure that out. Heuristics and anomaly detection, normally these things drive us all crazy because they're so chatty and so, kind of unreliable. But as you probably saw in a bunch of the samples, especially on some of the targeted attacks, basically if you when leveraged in the right context, they can really, light up like a Christmas tree, because you will find, some of the different types of techniques and these layered evasion techniques. It's a great way to defeat it. Again, doesn't require a commercial solution. There's tons of off-the-shelf stuff that you can do and leverage to be able to detect these types of techniques. And really, it's, at the end of the day, just giving a shit, right? A lot of people, they just don't, right? And there's kind of like, I was told, there's kind of three types of organizations, right? You have like the compliant, you have security conscious, and you have the, security sensitive. So the compliant is just like, I don't care, I just need to buy this so I can check off this PCI checklist, and just tell me how much it is, go away. And you have security conscious who are like, hey, we want to do the right thing. We don't have, a whole team of experts, and they're, definitely a perfect audience for this, because again, you can get, even without having to spend an arm and a leg, you can get solutions that can help you if you actually care. And security sensitive, they kind of have a whole practice going on, and, less worried about them. They kind of know what to do. But, perhaps the most importantly is to get involved, right? So there's, and I don't mean like in a spend money, donate, or anything kind of way. Like if you find command control channels, interesting samples, in your own environment, it's really easy to get them into the broader community. ETOpen's a great way, Snort, VRT as well. There's other foundations. If you're a coder, you can help develop, some of the engines that can detect this stuff. Suricata, Snort Bro, Moloch. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can get involved. So. Just to kind of wrap this up, because I know it's beer o'clock, and we definitely don't want to impose on that. So basically, the trends speak for themselves. I don't have to speak in hyperbole. Everyone knows, how serious the actual malware and compromise problems are. And it's only getting worse. It's really not gotten to a point where it's better. Attack surface is so massive. There's so many different ways that we can get breached. But, we can leverage our strengths, in this case, detecting command and control channels, which is our attacker's weakness in a lot of cases, to be able to, both prevent infections and counteract, when they do happen, respond quickly. Basically, as we up our game, they're going to up their game. We, got to have, kind of a line of sight to where things are going in the future. But as long as we kind of stay in touch, in tune, review our, with the community, reviewing our logs, our information, our infrastructure, what it has to tell us, that's really kind of the best shot that we have at mitigating this stuff. Yeah, basically that's what I got. And I want to say a few thank yous. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks DEF CON, for accepting this talk. Let me get up here on the soapbox, and yeah, for everyone for attending, coming all the way over here from Bally's, missing out on Mr. Robot. I saw them all in the green room. It was really funny. I was like, oh my god, it's like I'm not worthy. But so yeah, and like basically the whole emerging threats team, Proofpoint. There's too many people to name, but thanks everyone.